This episode is sponsored by yet another company that I truly stand behind, and that is Levels. And Levels is going to be offering you, the Behind the Shield podcast audience, a discount that I will tell you about at the end of this introduction. Now, before I even dive into what Levels does, when I had a conversation with their CEO and founder, Josh Clemente, he underlined such an important topic. So many of us rely on visits to our physicians to tell us how we are doing, and that is so backward. I am an absolute believer in putting autonomy back into the hands of the individual so they can take care of their own health. Now, what Levels does is it gives us the metrics so we can see exactly how everything is internally. So they help people improve their health through continuous glucose monitoring, comprehensive lab tests, and metabolic coaching. Now, through their 3 levels that they offer, they have programs that focus on weight loss, heart health, and glucose stability. I've now been through this program twice, and I'll kind of illustrate what it will look like. So you make an initial consultation with your Levels coach. You wear a continuous blood sugar monitor for 1 month. You'll complete a lab panel, and I did it through Quest Diagnostics. A clinician with Levels will then analyze your results and give you an action plan. That's when you can then start hitting your own health goals and in real time track your own progress. And then depending on the level you subscribe to, there's also a second blood work so you can now see how you're doing 6 months later. Now, by combining AI data, AI-powered insights, and human coaching together, 80% of Levels members improve their biomarkers. Now, as I mentioned, Levels is offering you, the audience of the Behind the Shield podcast, $100 off your first order if you use the promo code SHIELD at levels.com. And if you're interested in getting Levels for your department, email Josh Clemente, the founder and CEO of Levels, at josh@levels.com. And if you want to hear the origin story and so much more about this incredible company, listen to my interview with CEO and founder Josh Clemente on episode 1159 of the Behind the Shield podcast. Welcome to the Behind the Shield podcast. As always, my name is James Gearing, and this week it is my absolute honor to welcome on the show Firefighter, exercise physiology graduate, and the founder of Carna Bunker Gear, Ryan Conley. Now, in this conversation, we discuss a host of topics, from Ryan's journey into the world of powerlifting, the science of training the tactical athlete, PFAS, why he created a safe bunker gear that we can train and work out in, firefighter fitness standards, the work week, and so much more. Now, before we get to this incredible conversation, as I say every week, please just take a moment. Go to whichever app you listen to this on, subscribe to the show, leave feedback, and leave a rating. Every single 5-star rating truly does elevate this podcast, therefore making it easier for others to find. And this is a free library of almost 1,200 episodes now. So all I ask in return is that you help share these incredible men and women's stories so I can get them to every single person on planet Earth who needs to hear them. So with that being said, I introduce to you Ryan Conley. Enjoy. Well, Ryan, I want to start by saying 2 things. Firstly, thank you to Jim and Nick, because we met initially at the Brothers Helping Brothers conference in exotic Beaver Creek, Ohio, a few weeks ago. And secondly, I want to welcome you onto the Behind the Shield podcast today.
James, thanks for having me, man. I appreciate you. And yeah, it was a great coincidental meeting up there. I'm very happy that we took the invitation to join that conference, and I had a great time up there. I thought it was a super well-run event and very, tight-knit community. So it was very cool to be a part of that.
Absolutely. Well, very first question, where on planet Earth are we finding you today?
I'm actually not too far from you. I'm over in Tampa, Florida, and I've been a Floridian my whole life. So grew up in South Florida area, went to school at Florida State, and then Florida Atlantic University for my graduate. And I've worked at Cape Coral Fire Department, which is Southwest Florida, for over 10 years now. So I've been all over the state.
Brilliant. Well, let's start at the very beginning then. So tell me exactly where you were born, and then tell me a little bit about your family dynamic, what your parents did, how many siblings.
Okay. So Davie, Florida, it's by Fort Lauderdale area. It's a small suburban area. We actually had a lot of horse community. So that was kind of cool growing up, seeing people riding horses all the time. I grew up just a single child. I have a half brother, but he's 18 years older than me. So he's old enough to be my dad, but we're good friends. And the basically I got into sports at a young age, did a lot of competing in sports, taekwondo, wrestling, combat sports really stuck with me. I like that, enjoyed that a lot. And then also I caught the iron bug. And ever since I was young, I was always trying to figure out different ways to improve performance. And eventually that also turned into how to be healthy. So I had a long-standing relationship with sports and fitness and general health, similar to yourself. So I appreciate your podcast and all the great information that you've been creating to put out for first responders to try and help improve their performance and their health and longevity. So thank you for doing that.
Well, thank you for being part of it. This is what's crazy. It's a free library of 12, almost 1,200 episodes now, which is mind blowing.
It's wild.
Yeah. My wife just graduated from Nova Southeastern as an optometrist, doctor of optometry. So I was back and forth to Davie for almost 4 years straight. Talk to me a little bit more. I know we've got Western Ranches down there, some other places.
Yep.
I think Florida was a big cattle state for a long time, but you see still, some of the agriculture down there amidst, the super urban and suburban areas of Miami. What was your childhood like, and what has changed now when you go back?
You know what? It's still very similar. Like I said, we were very much suburban, a lot of middle-class families. I grew up with, my dad was a foreman for construction. Our neighbors were welders and mechanics. So I grew up around a lot of hardworking type guys. And my dad was also older. So I think he was 45 when I was born. So I had a little bit of a different upbringing with that kind of generational, hard-nosed type thing. And Davey was awesome. I couldn't have asked for a better place to grow up. I still have some lifelong friends that we grew up with. One of them is actually one of our business partners. So we grew up together through high school, and we've known each other for over 20 years now. So it's cool to be able to have long-lasting friends from that area. And every time I go back, we still just pick up with some of the kids that we grew up with or knew from high school or college, just like it was, we haven't missed a beat. So it's cool to have that kind of community still. It's interesting because it's the same thing in the fire service, right? Like you meet a lot of people that you just pick up and you might not talk to for a couple of years because you're at a different station or a different shift. And then as soon as you get back to it, you're like, oh yeah, it's just like we never left each other. So it was a good place to grow up. I appreciate it now, definitely looking back on it.
You mentioned being a sportsman when you were younger. What were you playing and doing as far as sports and exercise in the school years?
So I did all the normal stuff, at least over here: soccer, football, baseball, flag football. I never played football in high school. My dad wouldn't let me, but I wrestled. So we were a really good wrestling school. We had nine kids go to state my junior year, and then 4 or 5 my senior year. So I really dived into that. Same thing. Started lifting in high school. Really caught the iron bug in like college time. And then I competed in powerlifting after that for a decade, a little bit over 10 years. So I have always done some kind of athletic events, and I enjoy being competitive. There's something about that, like extra, drive that keeps you on task. It keeps you moving forward. It keeps you, on the correct path, right? Like it doesn't give you room for error, room to deviate and step away. So it kind of keeps you honest with the goal and the tasks. So I've taken those lessons from sport and kind of applied it into business also with starting the company. And it's all just hard work. What is this actually? I actually just changed my screensaver yesterday. So this was a quote I heard: life basically is pain, uncertainty, and constant work. So that is what we know to be a fact. And that's kind of how I feel sports are. the fire service, and then same thing with running the business. So taking those three little simple words and accepting them is your fate.
Absolutely. You mentioned Taekwondo as well. Was it WTF? Were you doing the full contact with the Hogu, or was it the ITF, the touch sparring?
I think it was the touch sparring. I mean, we had headgear, gloves, shin pads, all that, and it was the point system. So what was the first one? They were allowed to grab the gi?
WTF was the Hogu, so that pad that they wear on their torso, and you can actually knock them out with your feet.
Well. Yes, we did that as well. And then we actually did a year of Krav Maga, the Israeli combat training. So we did that, which was full contact boxing, head kicks, things like that also. So that was also super fun. It's funny because when I got into wrestling, I was like totally different. Grappling is completely different than striking. So it was a completely new skill set that I had to learn, but I loved it so much because it was so difficult and so different from what I was used to.
I did Taekwondo for quite a while as a teen, late teen. And I just went on this constant humbling journey then because I won national championships in Taekwondo and then joined boxing and just got murdered. And I was like, well, wait a second. I thought I was supposed to be good at this. And then and then got a little bit better and then went to Muay Thai and then they started kicking me in the leg. And I'm like, wait a second, what's this? And then went to Jiu-Jitsu and then they started strangling me. I'm like, for fuck's sake, am I any good at anything?
I cannot fight. I've been training for this my whole life, but I can't do it still. Everybody keeps changing the rules.
Exactly. Well, what about career aspirations? Were you thinking of the fire service in high school or was there something else in your mind?
No, it actually wasn't even on my radar until after college graduation for my undergrad. So I think I knew that I wanted to do something either in public service or exercise science. So at Florida State, I went down the public service type avenue and took criminology classes and like pre-legal classes, courses. So I enjoyed that stuff a lot. I think I got a minor in anthropology. I just enjoyed learning. And then once I got out, my ex-girlfriend at the time, her family lived right next door to a captain in at Hollywood, Florida. And he was a firefighter and we started to talk and we hit it off really well. He basically explained to me that more about the fire service and it sounded like a challenge to me. So once I heard that it was a challenge and it required physical and mental, composure, I was like, all right, let me give this a try. So I submitted my name to the academy and kind of just jumped in with both feet and never looked back.
And you kind of cut out for a second on my end. What year was that you joined the fire service?
So I joined the fire service. I got hired in 2015 and I went to the academy in 2014. So I got hired basically a year after I initiated the academy. So not too long. And I had basically one of my mentors was a captain at Hollywood Fire Department. So he had initiated me into explained to me what the fire service was about. It stuck out to me. I thought it was a challenge and I kind of jumped into that from there.
How competitive was it to get hired in South or in your case, West Florida back in 2015?
Yeah, it was definitely more competitive. When we started applying, I remember that some of the guys that I had went to high school with that were a few years older than myself, they had just gotten jobs and they went to the academy in like 08, 09, 2010, 2011. So like after the economy had crashed and nobody was hiring. So they were kind of a little bit on a waiting freeze for the lack of term. And I was able to get picked up around a year after, but I got picked up as an EMT on the Southwest coast, and that's not very common on the East Coast. So you typically have to be a paramedic. I had started paramedic school, but I had got hired, so I couldn't work on the West Coast and go to school on the East Coast, so I dropped out from there. But yeah, definitely, we had a lot more applicants at the time and across the board, as you know. And I know that's something that you've talked about and discussed, and I see the same thing now where the applicant pool is kind of thinning. So I don't know if it's a generational thing where there's just not enough workers in the workforce, where the population has kind of changed a little bit for working age, or if it's, you're also competing with other jobs that are, trying to get their attention and pay a healthy living wage,
Yeah. Healthy living wage, healthy living work week as well. That's the thing.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to me about the front door as far as fitness standards and expectations.
So that's a big a big thing for me. I could talk about this for hours, so keep me on track if need be.
We have ours. Carry on.
Fitness is something that I think everybody's an athlete, right? I think Socrates said it where, every human and every man deserves and should be training in some capacity for their own physical fitness and physical health. So with that being said, the fire service is probably held at even a higher standard. They are held at a higher standard. So you always need to be in some kind of shape. And I don't want a random measurable to dictate whether or not a firefighter can perform the job or not, because there is really more to it than a metric. But if you can perform the job and you can do, very hard demanding things, which is what we do when you're in full gear on air, going into a hot burning building, trying to do things that are cognitively challenging and physically challenging at the same time. So there has to be some kind of physical strength capacity that the firefighter has. There has to be some kind of physical aerobic capacity that the firefighter has, and they have to be able to work under duress. So if you can accomplish those things, I think you're doing the correct, you are on the correct path. And if we're missing those things and we can improve in some areas, then you can either specifically try and isolate some of those variables, like improving their strength, improving their aerobic performance, operate or training in areas that have, higher heart rate duration. So high intensity training, things of that nature. And if you play with those variables and turn the knobs the right way, you can apply that to the individual. And at the individual level, then you can make progress with them on their specific areas that they need improvement with, or if they just need to maintain a certain level of strength. If somebody can squat, if you have a 200-pound athlete and they're squatting 400, 500 pounds, they don't really necessarily need to get stronger to be a good fireman, but they need to make sure that they have enough aerobic capacity. So if we can just maintain that base of strength, you're not doing hours of lifting, you're just doing stuff here and there, and then making sure that your aerobic capacity is met. So you see a lot of that with bigger athletes, where they need to make sure their cardiovascular fitness is intact. And then the lighter weight athletes, because their absolute strength isn't as high and their relative strength compared to the weight and the load they're carrying with PPE and tools and equipment, and possibly dragging other firefighters or victims, all of the heavy burden that we can carry physically, they need to sometimes work a little bit more on their absolute strength. So I know that's a big window to kind of peer through, but does that answer some of it?
Yeah, no, it does. I mean, I'm the latter. So I'm definitely a smaller, athlete that had to work more on the strength and strength endurance. But when you look at what's expected of us, and the last place I worked, Reedy Creek, not known really for their fire, but next to my station was a 30-story hotel, 30-story hotel.
Yep.
And so a high-rise strip, which is nothing above and beyond what you would need to carry. So basically, a length of hose, 2 spare bottles, and a tool with your bunker gear and pack is 100 pounds on my 175-pound frame, 168 back then. Now you're ascending 30 floors, and then you arrive where you actually begin to work. So when we set these standards, it's not making up what if you had to throw a 300-pounder over your shoulder and, run across America? No, we're not saying that. Like the most basal thing that we have to do could be taking a blood pressure, or it could be the scenario I just described. Yeah. So, there is a need for not just a standard, but a high standard. And I think, when you look at the CPAT or the fire sled, the FPAT, I like those because no one then can say it's not fair. Black, white, gay, straight, Christian, Muslim, male, female, whatever the label that you've given yourself, you either can or you can't. These are the tools we need in the fireground. Are you operational or are you not operational?
Correct. Yeah. And I love the fire sled and those guys. They've got a great product, great group of dudes. And I know they're around your area. So my hat's off to them. Big fan of their stuff. And yeah, I mean, there has to be some objective. And I think that when you make it fireground specific, like the combat challenge, the fire sled, you're then capable of saying, hey, these are movements and things that we are doing in the fire service. These are movement specific sport specific, job specific applications to assess your fitness. It's not just putting somebody on Stairmaster and doing a VO2 max, which is a helpful test, but it's not the job. And the same thing with the push-up standard. It's a helpful test, and I can glean a lot of information from that to help firefighters. And that's kind of where I see the blend of health and fitness and firefighter performance. We have the side of health and fitness, and then we have the side of performance. To allow long-term performance, especially in the fire service with a long career of 20 to 30 years, you're going to need to have a general foundation of health and keep that health for a long time. You're not a pro athlete. You're not in the military just serving 3 or 4 years. You have a long career ahead of you. So, maintaining a base of health and not beating yourself to death is going to be very helpful for being able to make it through to retirement and be able to retire and be healthy. Hell, not even just perform the job, but what's on the back end also. So,
do you have annual fitness standards in your department?
We do. So I'm actually one of the WFI committee members. So we do biannual testing. So every 2 years. So we'll test half the department once a year. So 50% of the department we test 1 year, and then 50% we test the next year. So we're doing it always. The crew's getting it done, depending on when their year is. But we have a really good comprehensive health assessment. We work with My Health On-Site. They're actually based out of Orlando area, I believe. They work with a few different fire departments, and they're basically contracted medical doctors and nurses, and they have a clinic on-site. So they do that for the entire city. We'll have our specific firefighter blood panel where they take a ton of blood work. We'll do a calcium score, which I think is awesome. We're also looking now to try and also include what's on top of the calcium score. It's basically a calcium score with contrast dye, so you can see if the plaque is soft. So if you're meeting metrics where LDL cholesterol and ApoB are elevated above certain levels, and you're also at age, they can then take a next step and do that test as well. So the calcium score is really good. It's a good step up from some of the other things we used to do. And, x-rays for the chest, what's the carotid artery they'll look at. And I think, the typical things, hearing, eyesight, lung capacity, things like that. And then you speak with a nurse practitioner and a physician at the end of it, go through all that data. And then once they meet that criteria, they can go to the WFI. We'll conduct a VO2 max test on an incline treadmill run, push-ups, wall squats, we do a broad jump instead of a vertical jump, and shoulder mobility, hamstring mobility, things of that nature. A lot of what the WFI assessment is. And we've tweaked it here and there, but overall, it's a very good test. I think it's a great foundational tool. We'll look at body fat also, along with BMI, because BMI is not enough data, not enough info. So looking at body fat and where some people are holding their body fat is helpful. So one of the numbers I've seen, which I think you'll agree with, the folks that were below a 40. So with the VO2 max, typically you see numbers around 44, 45 milliliters per minute of oxygen as the recommendations from the NFPA and different studies that you can see. So with the test that we typically do, it's an equation-based test. You want to give yourself about a 10% standard error rate either way. So I basically look at 40 to 50 is passing. So anybody below 40, I want to say it was like 20% of our population from what we tested last year. And within that 20%, about 70% of them were over fat. So they had for the males, it was a body fat level of 20% or higher. So you definitely see a correlation between higher levels of body fat and lower levels of aerobic fitness. And that's well cited in the research as well. And then secondarily, a big number that sticks out to me is our blood pressure. On average, I want to say 25% of our department was normotensive, so 120 over 70 or less. And then 25% was stage 2 hypertension, and 50% was pre-hypertension or stage 1. So you see that elevation in blood pressure, which is not great for chronic health across the board. And, that's something that I I would like to improve across the fire service in general, but then also, with my friends and my brothers and sisters at the fire department. So those are some of the numbers that I've seen, and that I think are relevant and that actually make a difference between performance and health in longevity. So those are things that I think guys should be looking at specifically.
Are you held to an annual punitive fitness standard, or is it just more the screening?
So it's not it's not a punitive standard. It's the screening. And then on top of that, giving them advice and trying to help get them on the correct path. So we don't have any punitive things set up. We're trying to create more of a carrot and the stick, where we're using the carrot more so. And we're still figuring that out. It's a work in progress. We do have full backing from the fire department, and the union has been supportive as well. So I think that we're in a good environment, trying to work between the two and trying to make forward progress. And we'll see how that goes. So
what about work week? I mean, this is something that I speak about occasionally.
Mm-hmm.
What are you guys working at the moment?
So we're 24/48s, with a 3-week Kelly. Obviously big fan of the Kelly. I also know a couple of guys that work with us. So what are we at? I think we're close to 300 members online. We're 13 stations. So a few of the guys that I know came from 24/72s up north. Not many, but I know a couple that did work those. And they are giant fans of the 24/72. So I know that once DeSantis signed the bill to try and allow or encourage departments to go for the lower 40-hour work week, that was something that our department presented to the city for our next rounds of negotiation in a few years. So it's either going to tentatively, 24/72s or double Kelly days, however that would look like. But yeah, I think that would be great. I'm a big fan of, getting adequate rest and sleep and allowing people's HRV to recover and get back to work and have enough time for their family and their life. So I was trying to push, 24-hour shift and then get a Kelly, so 5 days off, but I don't think they were going to go for that. So
like every single time.
Yep, every time. I'm like, that was a hard shift. I think we need 5 days off.
Well, this is the funny thing when you look at what we're trying to get. Like the absolute gold standard is the 24/72, and that's a 42-hour work week. And then you look at the corporate world now, and they're actually leaning into the 32-hour work week, and they're finding it incredibly efficient, productive. I mean, all the things, and they've got a happier, healthier workforce. We're chasing something that that industry used to have, and now they're moving even further forward. So, we joke about that, but I mean, the people that you call 911 on your worst day, wouldn't you want them to have at least, what the average person has, if not even less time?
More.
So, that's a future conversation. But the 24/72, I mean, at least 72 hours between every single shift. And I think with the Kelly conversation, it's interesting because Plano, for example, have done this now. They've put, whether it's, 3-week Kelly or, like you said, even more. If you need a couple of years, 3 years to get to the 24/72, then you can use a Kelly day as a stepping stone. But you have to say that is step one of this 3-step plan to 24/72. What a lot of departments are doing now, and they're saying, "Oh, we'll just go to a Kelly for now." Well, that doesn't fix anything. Actually, it makes it worse because you just punched more holes in your schedule and created more overtime. And everyone's going to work their own Kelly day, so you've just basically paid them time and a half to take no rest whatsoever. So, but if you hire enough people as you progress to the 24/72 to cover those Kelly days, and it's absolutely a stepping stone then. So understanding that nuance, I think, is important.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of our front office. I think that I personally have a great relationship with them. I think most guys respect the front office as well now. And I know that is their goal, is to start trying to overhire. And I know that when you have the Kelly day, essentially that's about half a shift. So when you eliminate the Kelly day, you only need to fill another half shift to make a D shift. So I know that there's some, chess pieces that we're trying to move around and preemptively anticipate. So we'll see how all that goes. But on the 24/72 stuff, as far as that, also is obviously the conversation is really about sleep, right? So trying to figure out the best ways to facilitate good sleep for guys. And that is something where cancer risk prevention comes to mind. I mean, I speak on this quite often, where when you have, it was one study. I think it was one single study I looked at, but or two different studies. But one of them was college age males at less than 7 hours of sleep. So young, healthy adults, not under a ton of stress, not firefighters, not having high exposure rates or anything. And their natural killer cells dropped by 40% with less than 7 hours of sleep. And then when they got 4 hours of sleep, so they were restricted, I think they were only allowed to sleep from midnight to 4 a.m. or 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. They had a 72% reduction in natural killer cells. So that's extremely important because that is the immune system's primary cancer fighting cell, as well as just fighting the common cold, things of that nature. So the immune system is essentially compromised from this lack of sleep, and you're compounding that as a firefighter with high levels of exposure. So the high levels of exposure combined with, lack of sleep is really kind of one of the symptoms of increased rates of cancer and then secondarily heart disease as well. But that lack of sleep really does a number on us in many different ways, along with mental health, cancer, cardiovascular disease, all of the above. So that is a grave concern in my mind.
And let's flip it round on its head. What an incredible initiative to be able to hit so many of these things that ail the fire service with just one change.
Mm-hmm.
You want to, like you said, just the number of exposures, carcinogens, or, the mental health exposures. Well, then if you've got a fourth shift, now you're sharing that load a little bit more, not to mention the elimination of unnecessary overtime where you were getting even more exposures and even less sleep. But the biggest bang for your buck, like you said, taking the money, the downstream money, and putting it into, in your case, another 50% of a shift. And then boom, now you got 4 shifts, working healthy, getting overtime just when it comes around once in a blue moon. You've limited the exposures and you've given the body the rest and recovery to actually address the things that don't turn into cancer then, or don't turn into addiction and suicide ideation. I mean, it's such a powerful initiative to really completely move the needle in the fire service. But there's also, I can tell you this from experience, so much resistance to it, to the point where, you hear most people talking about cancer, they talk about our gear, and we'll get to that, and the carcinogens in our gear. When you talk about mental health, it's what Ryan saw, it's what James saw. And, if you look at both of those, one of the biggest contributors to both is sleep deprivation.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I mean, with all of these conversations, there are nuances and important caveats and details that really do make a difference. And I like to explain all these things, especially with the cancer risk reduction, mental health, cardiovascular disease, all these things. It's a high definition problem, and trying to treat it like a low definition problem and trying to create resolution from that and change from thinking that it's a simple thing is not helpful. Now, what is helpful is understanding that it's complex and then trying to look at the individual details and like, okay, well, if I break all of these, underlying contributing issues up and I look at them one by one and we start attacking those and implementing strategies to try and reduce some of those risks, now we're going to make a difference in, reducing these large comprehensive risks that are, really the problem in the fire service. And whether or not guys want to admit that is, it's one thing, but it's there. The data's there. The numbers are there. So I think that it's time that and I do see that guys are trying to push and trying to make a difference. There is obviously some resistance, as you've seen and as I've seen. But overall, there is definitely more of a positive forward movement to trying to improve our health amongst ourselves and each other. It's not, the fire service is great at trying to help other people, but sometimes we kind of forget to help each other and help ourselves. So that's something that I can see the wheels slowly starting to move. The implementation of more gyms across the country and stations, the implementation of gross decon, the implementation of trying to have dispatch systems that aren't waking everybody up in the station. So there's all these little variables that we can play with. 24/72s, like all of these things help, and discussing them and figuring out the pros and cons and how to use them is really what's important in my mind.
To me, in this whole conversation, it's like saying, well, we're having a problem with blood on the carpet. So the person goes, well, why don't we just get a carpet cleaner and we'll just sop it up? Like, we did that, but there's more blood on the carpet. And then someone else points out, well, wait a second, that guy over there is bleeding. Well, no one's having the conversation that there's a bloke with a knife in the room that's running around stabbing everyone. Maybe we should get him first. You know what I mean? Because there are these nuances, but to me, that's the biggest thing for us. And then, like you said, what's beautiful is then you free up time, you free up money, you have more motivated,
Mhm.
men and women that then want
Yes.
to go to training. They want to go to the gym. They want to, they sleep better, and then it's just this
Mhm.
this kind of amplification of health then. And then you can put in
Yeah.
mandatory fitness standards that are punitive because people want to hold themselves to that standard. And you have,
Mhm.
access to PTs. So when you do get hurt, you rehab properly. So all these areas, because we're so far, and I'm sure this will resonate with you, particularly with your background, but when we have wellness conversations, we're talking the strength and conditioning, nutrition, we're talking about, well, how can we die less? Well, the other side of the spectrum is the high level performance. How can
Mhm.
James make it to the top of those 30 flights of stairs with his heart rate still at a good rate and his breathing is still low, and he's optimizing his tank and he can still think clearly? That's
Mhm.
high, like tier one performance. That's where we should
Yes.
be focused. But there's a
Mhm.
big
Yeah.
chasm between, well, James is 100 pounds. Let's try and not, get him to not have a heart attack on the fireground. To, can he get those kids out on the 30th floor?
Yeah. No, that is such a great point. And you said that very well. I thought that was very well said. And that's the fun thing to me, is like playing with the performance, optimizing the guys that want to train. And then that was something I got to do with our last class of new hires. So I got to train them in the morning, and we basically split up into one. I think we trained 4 days a week, so we had two high intensity days where we were lifting weights, basically just doing some sumo deadlifts, kettlebell work, things of that nature. And then added on top of that some high intensity work, so sled pushes, assault bike intervals, things that were really pushing their heart rate and pushing the pace, and getting them to the point where they were uncomfortable. Their legs were smoked, their lungs are burning, like you don't want to take another step or do anything. And by the end of that, they're laying on the ground, trying to catch their breath and look like they're going to die. And unfortunately, that's kind of the way that you need to push it sometimes. And for the ability to push the heart rate up into your near maximal heart rate zone. So doing things that are going to really challenge you and get your heart rate to feel like it's going to, your heart is going to change and explode out of your chest. And for your lungs to just feel like you cannot catch your breath. So that's a very important tool to utilize. And then on top of that, the secondary day was doing just steady state cardio. It's very easy stuff. You can, go low intensity to moderate intensity, but we're not pushing to the point where they can't recover. They're not able to push. They're able to maintain a good work pace for 20 to 60 minutes. And we built that up over the time. So you've got resistance training. So they're building strength. They're doing explosive work with body weight jumps, throws, things of that nature in their warm up. They're doing high intensity interval work where they're getting their heart rate up super high. And then they're doing low intensity work to build their aerobic fitness base, allow mitochondria to adapt, allow their tissues to be able to perfuse and use these nutrients and oxygen. So when you can kind of facilitate intelligent training and implement that into guys' foundation in the fire service, I think that goes a really long way into teaching them how to train. And then they can kind of take that on with them throughout the rest of their career. And that's what will facilitate long-term performance, I think, is getting them hooked right off the bat. As soon as they're and they never fall off. You just keep them on it. You keep the culture in the fire service and the fire department wanting to work out and wanting to stay in shape. And obviously having some kind of equipment helps. But yeah, that's the long-term strategy to me, is getting them on as soon as possible, getting them addicted to working out and performance, and then they see the results. And we did a before and after, where we did a combat challenge test before, and then we did one after. Every one of them was like, it was so much easier. I feel so much better. And I'm like, all right, then we did what we needed to do, and your times improved. It was great. So I was very happy with that. And I hope that, we can continue to do that and continue to cultivate that in our department.
It's interesting. When I got hired at Reedy Creek, I went through the hiring process, and there were a couple of classes, I think, after me. And it was, you just got hired, you did the admin paperwork, you went around the theme parks, you rode some rides, and that was it. I mean, really, I'm not exaggerating. You didn't have anything that tested you in any way, shape, or form. And it wasn't a cohesive class. It really wasn't. And then prior to that, I'd had absolute crucibles, Hialeah and Anaheim, and we were friends for life. And I just went down to Hialeah a few weeks ago and hung out with my original instructor and one of my classmates. And it's so nice going to a drill ground, realizing you're not the student anymore. But in Reedy Creek that year, and I'll give kudos to some of the the spark plugs in the creek that have been really trying to get a good fitness, oh my goodness, like peer fitness trainers in that department.
Yes.
Despite the department, I'll be honest. And that year, collectively, we were able to get them to let us do PT for the new hire class. And there was a few people in there that thought they were just going to ride rides and scared the shit out of them when they realized they're going to have to actually do real firefighter stuff. But the rest of the class were awesome. And, we spent, I think it was 4 weeks PTing them. And at the end of it, that tower I told you, we put everyone had gear on, and I put a bunch of stuff on. We climbed the 30 floors and we stood on the roof and took a picture. And the reason I'm saying that, it was the same kind of stuff that you were talking about, sandbags and sleds and all functional stuff, not trying to humiliate someone, giving them some days that were, a little taste of the pain cave and some days that were deload days. But at the end, there was a sense of pride. Like, congratulations, you made it through this, and now you are Reedy Creek firefighters. And I had some of the guys say, look, I've worked for, 1 or 2 departments prior, and that was the best orientation PT we've ever had. And it's not just me, there were a few of us. But that is the point. When you have that bar set high at the front door, it brings that class together. Yes, of course, you can see if anyone needs to be cut loose, if they just don't want to put the effort in. But more importantly, everyone that's there for the right reason, there's this feeling of, achievement at the end of it, and this bonding that you get through shared suffering. So I think that's another value of a strong orientation with the bar held high, is that you're going to have that camaraderie through the rest of your career.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I love that class. I thought there were a bunch of good dudes. I don't want to say I was lucky, but they were all younger guys, 25, maybe 26 at their oldest. So all of them had some kind of sport background. It was fun to train them. And I know that I've seen a shift in our department. Like when I got hired, fitness was not, you didn't work out on duty. There was, makeshift gyms here and there. There wasn't, matching equipment. It wasn't really a thing, especially as a probie or a young guy. Like, it was not okay. So now that I see, like, I was just acting yesterday as lieutenant, which is basically a captain in most departments. So one of my probies is like, hey, like, do you mind writing me a workout? Because I trained him through orientation. I was like, yeah, man, absolutely. So he's working out at 3 PM. I'm like, that would have never happened when I was on probation. So it is cool to look at that like 10 years later and see the shift in the culture. And I'm happy and proud to see that for sure with our department. And I know that we definitely are a more health and fitness oriented department. So, and the camaraderie that comes from that is awesome. Guys working out with each other. And from the trainer perspective, the only caveat I have with this is one size fits all doesn't always work for guys that are a little bit behind in certain areas. Like you said, like, you're not trying to embarrass people. You're just trying to get them up to standard. Right. So trying to throw them into, a very challenging workout, like just say like a hard CrossFit workout or a Murph, like tossing them into something like that is not productive. You have to start them where they're at and meet them where they're at. And that really is just basing training off people's individual levels of fitness. Is that ideal? Like, no, obviously we want everybody to be a stud. And we want everybody to be, coming out the gates hot every time, but that's really not the reality we live in. So when you have guys that are, a little bit behind or not as strong or not as in shape, you have to give them something to make progress. And when they make progress, then you can push it harder and harder as time goes on, but they have to start somewhere and you have to meet them where they're at.
That's what I love about the strongman implements too, is that, I don't know if you found this, but not so much in the brand new recruit, but the guys that have been on a while that you're trying to get back into it. Because I do a lot of like seminars within the department itself. Mm-hmm. And, if I had to get them to do a snatch, they're going to be like, no, I'm not doing that. But if you just say, pick up that sandbag and walk over there, they're like, well, I could do that. Push that sled or drag that sled back. Well, I can do that. And you're still challenging them in the same kind of way, but you're taking out that kind of skill element. And you're making it more fireground specific anyway. I mean, you carry a sandbag, it's like carrying a dummy or carrying foam to the engine. you drag push as like a hose or a human.
Mhm.
But I found that, and then once you get the confidence up, then you can incrementally load without, like we said, humiliating them, because there are people that are deconditioned that are extremely embarrassed about it, and that's okay. There was no
Yeah.
standard in this profession, so we got to bring you back. The only person I have no time for is the one that's not willing to put the work in to get back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I saw that. I saw something similar to that the last couple of years with one of my buddies who's on my crew, and he wasn't an athlete growing up. He's 45 or so. He's an older dude in the fire service for being a firefighter, and he's mechanic redneck. Like, he's funny, awesome dude, great guy, and he just started working out with one of the other driver engineers there, and literally every shift he would push a sled. It was a circuit: sled push-ups, sandbag carry. Sometimes they would throw it over the shoulder, and I think walking lunges. And he would do that for like 30 minutes every single shift. And he got in better and better shape. And that's just his standard. He does that. He doesn't think about it. He just goes out and does it. And I'm like, that's awesome. Like, I love seeing that. And it's not high-end training and programming and stuff that I nerd out and geek out on. But I'm like, he's doing everything that he needs to do and staying in shape at an older age, which is, I love seeing that. And it was cool to watch him do that, because that wasn't, part of his lifestyle prior, and him talking about how much better he felt was cool to watch. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that too. When I first was in basically the last two departments, really, I would be out on my own doing, at that time, CrossFit, and for
Mhm.
weeks and weeks and weeks, it was just me, and someone would come out and maybe make a joke and then go back in and watch TV. But then something shifted, and one day someone said, "I want to do this with you." And then
Mhm.
one became two, two became three, four, and then all of a sudden I would be on a day off and come in, maybe come down to the theme park with my son or something, and I'd swing by the station and the whole crew is out there working out, and you're not even there anymore. So this
Yeah.
is the other thing too, is that if you can take those first steps, and again, not humiliate someone, make them comfortable just being at whatever level they are, now that wheel is turning, and you can
Mhm.
step away, and now that crew will continue doing it. So that was very powerful to see that if you just light a fuse, that's all you've got to really do. Then you can step back and go light a fuse somewhere else.
Yeah, you were the catalyst to progressive change for the levels of fitness in your guys. No, I love it. And it also helps with mental health. Again, like, coming back to all that stuff. Dude, actually, yeah, small tangent for exercise and fitness. That's another staple in my mind for, sleep and exercise and fitness, right? Obviously, you talk about this stuff all the time as well. But cancer risk reduction, I think 30 to 40% of cancers are potentially reduced from not being obese and just being in shape. So right off the bat, you have a giant tool to leverage just by not being overweight and working out and exercising. We see that with cancer survivors. We see that with guys that are coming back from cancer, and also during cancer. If you're exercising, doing some kind of resistance training, chemo works better. You're going to recover better. All these things. So, like, you have such an amazing tool at your disposal, and all it takes is a little bit of effort and give a shit, and sometimes some education. So, like, that is needed as well. And then once they get into it, it really just has such compounding benefits. But yeah, exercise is obviously great for mental health. It's great for cancer risk reduction. It's great for cardiovascular disease. And all three of these are something that are burdens or things that we carry in the fire service. So sleeping, making sure that you're on top of your sleep, and making sure that you're taking care of it off duty as much as possible is a priority in my mind for the individual. And then ensuring that you're working out, whether it's on shift or off shift, is also on the individual. And then the department needs to try and facilitate the best possible ways to allow guys to sleep as much as possible when they are not called for emergency services, and facilitate guys with equipment that is going to allow them to be healthier, stronger, better shape for longer. So, a barbell is not expensive. Sandbags aren't expensive. They're not that much of an investment when you look at the grand scheme of things for how long it's going to last. I've had a barbell, barbells are going to last 20, 30 years. Like, they're pieces of steel that are made to get beat up. Like, so to me, it's a no brainer in my mind. But I think the overall trend towards pushing this tactical fitness, all of this type of blend of performance and health is just vital for forward progress in the fire service, and that becoming a standard is something that I look forward to for sure.
100%. I did sports science in England and then finished off here in Florida, UF, exercise science. What made you get into the academic side, and then how has that become a value for you on the fire side?
For sure. And I definitely I would want to ask you what you saw the difference between the two from England to coming over here academic wise, and what you saw and learned. So academic wise, I am a nerd. I love learning stuff. I got my undergraduate degree in criminology, like I said, and I basically self-educated myself, different, certifications, reading all the time, trying to just learn things and apply things to my powerlifting performance, and then eventually firefighting. So I was always doing that. I was coaching, training people. So I had a lot of hands-on and development, training physique athletes, other powerlifters, my mom, kids, across the gamut of things, being able to see how people responded to different training stimuli. And then I had my girlfriend at the time was doing her graduate degree at USF in Tampa. And I got exposed to more of the academic setting. I went and sat in on some classes. I was really intrigued. I loved learning and hearing what they had to say. And I started reading more studies. So instead of just, because people cite stuff all the time, and I'm like, is that real? Is that actually what it's saying? So I would start reading the studies on my own. And at first I was super confused. It is very hard to read published literature. And eventually I just got a little bit better at it, and a little bit better at it, and a little bit better at it. And I started looking for programs that would allow me to do that while I was still working. At the time, this was pre-COVID. There really wasn't much available. Like, there was some online colleges, I think Cal, Penn State, or something like that. It was a weird blend of Pennsylvania and California, but it was very expensive. So I had kind of kept that on the back burner and just, was thinking about it as an alternative thing. And COVID happened, and FAU created a fully online graduate degree in exercise physiology. The guy that ran the department was somebody that I had known from Florida State. We had competed in some powerlifting competitions together. So I applied. I got in on a waiver, basically saying that, I had to keep a certain GPA. I think I wound up getting all A's or maybe some A minuses. So I kept the waiver the entire time and was able to graduate in, I think, 2.5 years with a graduate degree while working full time. The department paid for the degree. I think I only came out of pocket like $3,000-$4,000 maybe over the time course of the thing. And I loved it. So I then took that, continued to read literature. I dived a little bit more into some of the cancer side of things. So trying to learn a little bit more about cancer, trying to learn a little bit more about firefighters and heat, how heat affects firefighter performance, and trying to see what was going on with cancer in the fire service. Like, where was this coming from? What was some of the studies showing? And what were some of the preliminary data on PFAS, things of that nature? And it was a really large amount of data, except for the PFAS. So PFAS is still something that's fairly new, but I really enjoyed trying to create a picture so that I could understand, and that I could also call, bullshit on other things that I would heard or see that people were either, and this is the same thing with science. Science is what you learn in high school, right? I mean, you're supposed to have an idea, you have a theory, you test the theory, you try and, come up with an objective, honest, outcome-based answer for what you find during the study. Now, every study has its limitations. You've got cohort studies that are going to look at large swaths of the population. You're not going to control a lot of variables with that. And that's part of the study. You're allowing people to free live, and you're looking to see what's actually changing. But obviously, you're not going to have the ability to manipulate their exercise or their food or any of these things. And then you have other things that are, laboratory studies, where we're looking at a cell in a petri dish and how does it respond to this inflammatory marker and things of that nature. How does this cancer cell respond to this? And then you have other studies that are looking at tightly controlled experiments, where you have a person living in a metabolic ward, and they're getting 3 meals a day, and they're counting, these scientists and nutritionists are counting every single calorie that these people are consuming. And you can literally have all of these tightly controlled variables controlled in a living human being. So with all that being said, you have pros and cons of all of these different types of research. And what you're supposed to do is look at all of it together, see what the evidence is trying to show you, right? Like, what is the picture being painted from all this different data set, and understand what the limitations are. Because obviously every study is not going to be, it is not a 100% encompassing answer. This is not the solution to the problem. You're just trying to see what on average everything says. So with that being said, some people misinterpret research on accident. It's just they're not understanding what they're seeing, or unfortunately, there's people that completely misinterpret data on purpose to try and fit their narrative, which we are humans. You know, people tend to do things to benefit themselves sometimes that is not honest. And that even can occur in science. So it's not common, but it does occur. Like, I've seen scientists and heard of scientists that have completely falsified data, in order to secure funding. And eventually those papers usually get retracted, and they get in trouble, and they lose all respect and self-esteem. So across the gamut of all this stuff, I jumped into this. I loved trying to figure out this picture on firefighter health, firefighter performance, and having a really good foundation for reading the literature and being able to interpret that for the guys in the fire service, for the guys and the girls in the fire service, so that they don't have to do it. Because I know they're not doing it. And there is a disconnect between what is being studied and what they are finding out there in some of these research, and what is being communicated to the fire service itself. So I want to try and be, a voice and a medium to communicate some of this information.
A perfect example of what you're talking about. And again, I don't mean to repeat this to vilify the person who did the study, but I had Joel Billings on the show. He did the study, and this again, taking a bigger step back, the fact that we're not guiding researchers to do research in the right areas is a failure of the fire service. So let me put that back on our shoulders. But Joel did a study of comparing the 24-48 to the 48-96. And conclusion, small sample size, the 48-96 is healthier. The fire service runs with it. You actually listen to Joel talking about the study. It was a small sample size, but he studied a department that ran one call a shift, less than one call at night.
Yeah.
And you have Seattle and all these departments go, well, this is obviously perfect for us because they haven't looked. The second thing is, if you look at what the actual takeaway was, the second half of the 48, because the firefighters weren't having to get in a car like I used to at 5 a.m, drive 70 miles to work, and then arrive sleep deprived at the beginning of your shift. They slept all night, woke up in their own bed in the station. They had a better quality of sleep for that actual second shift day. Where that actually is advantageous is if any department in the whole of America that works 24 hours has the option to start whenever the hell they want because they finish at the same time. So you move that to 11 a.m., 12 noon. Now you've gleaned that one advantage of what that study showed. But
yes.
Apples to apples, I don't know of a single department that runs 0 calls pretty much every night and, 1 call a shift. There might be a station outlying somewhere, but as a whole, most of the guys are getting their dicks kicked in 24/7. So this is what they say, little knowledge is a very dangerous thing. And they took that study, and again, no fault of Joel's. He went in just thinking he was, doing a study of a department. And the ripple effect of that literally has people, and I see it on the comments now, saying the 48-96 is better than 24-72. To clarify that, 56 hours a week is better than 42 hours a week. So this is a perfect example, in my opinion, of how you can take science, a study that you don't truly understand, run with it, and do, insurmountable damage in a profession.
Yes. That is, I unfortunately have not heard that yet, and that hurts my soul to hear that. And that is a great example. That is a misinterpretation of the data. And when you speak to the guy that created the study, he is obviously informing guys that they are not reading it correctly. But once that's out there, it's out there, and people have their mind made up. They hear one thing at a conference, and that is what it is. And I was even speaking at a department a year ago, and this was prior to the most recent study that came out for sauna usage from, I think, Finland or Norway. And the data at the time was basically just saying that, actually, I don't even know if this had come out yet, that there was no harm coming from using saunas in the fire service, because that was an original thing, was potentially it could be harming you because you're opening up the pores, allowing more carcinogens to come in. So anyways, this smaller department, the fire chief at the time, he's no longer there, he wanted guys to jump off the rig and hop into a sauna immediately. No shower, no decon, none of this. And that is dumb. Now, they didn't know any better, and they consulted or spoke with a professor at a seminar or a conference. She informed them that that was not intelligent to do. And that was what was in his mind, was that now forever from that point on, he didn't think saunas were good for you, for firefighters. So I'm like, okay, guys, there's extremes that are happening here. So yeah, I really try and do my best to speak in a way that makes sense for guys and that it's applicable, because you can really just, it's just all over social media. It's not just the fire service. There's so much bullshit out there. It drives me insane. And when you have a good radar, because you have a background in it, such as yourself, you know what to look for, and you can hear bullshit when you hear it, when you know it when you hear it. Unfortunately, a lot of guys don't have the background of exercise physiology, of training, et cetera. But it's the same thing as, a mechanic, somebody who works on their own vehicles, going to a mechanic, and the guy's blowing smoke up his ass for, it's going to be $800, $1,000 to change your front brakes. Well, that's ridiculous. It's a 30-minute job, and brake pads are $50. So when you have an understanding of what you're listening to, you have a much better, ability to shove off the bullshit. But in the fire service, we don't have that background. So that's where I think that it's so important for guys like you and me to be able to try and facilitate these conversations, listen to some of the experts in the field, hear what they're actually saying, and communicate that to the guys online and be like, hey, I know this is what you thought it was. This is actually what they meant to say. And then they're most likely to be like, oh, that makes sense. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Let's do that instead. But, so it's not easy. And I try my best to explain this stuff and make it make sense to guys. What you need to do. So yeah, school helps you. It teaches you how to think, right? And it gives you a good foundation for having the bullshit detector, in my mind. I think that's really where the important stuff is.
Yeah, no, I agree. Well, let's kind of walk through to Carna Gear then. As you've been in the fire service since 2015. What was that journey from carcinogens, from exposures in the actual incidents themselves, maybe your kind of education on PFAS, and then what made you develop an alternative to that?
Yeah. So like everybody, I mean, you jump in the fire service, into a fire academy, you're not thinking much of what you're told to do. It's just the way we do things. And there's only so many, types of clothing you can wear that are going to protect you in a 400-degree burn. So when you're, at that age, you just get some hand-me-down clothing or some rental turnout gear and go about your life and don't know anything, and eventually we got to the point where we were exposed to gross decon. That was done by the guys at the state of Florida. We had a really good group of guys with the cancer, anti-cancer. God, they're going to kill me. The Florida Firefighter Cancer Association. No, anyways, there's some awesome dudes down there. They went and lobbied, and they're the ones that got the green buckets on our apparatus. So I started seeing that, and I was like, oh, okay. So we want to scrub ourselves after we get out of a fire, trying to get off some of these particulates. And I'm like, what are particulates? What is some of the stuff we're exposed to in general? So some of my good friends, they were pretty avid trainer, working out in gear, right? They would train in gear almost every single day on shift. And I was like, all right, it sucks that these guys are exposing themselves unnecessarily when they're trying to do the right thing and trying to make themselves better firefighters. And it's awesome that they're my friends and they're badasses, but it's also not cool if 30 years down the road they get cancer and die, um, based on, you know, an accumulation of exposures throughout a career. So I was like, why don't we just look at this like a sports scientist and see that we need gear that is heavy, bulky, restrictive, and keeps heat trapped. We don't need to be wearing our frontline gear that's expensive, number one. And second, it's never going to be fully clean, because no matter how you clean the equipment or the PPE, it's always going to have some level of contamination once it is exposed to an IDLH atmosphere. So we can just make something that mimics frontline gear. So we kind of had that revelation driving back from the gym one day, me and my friend, my good friend Zach, who's also my partner, and I bought a set of old Morning Pride gear. I located a designer up in North Florida. She said that she could tear it apart and remake something based off that design into using the material that she deemed appropriate, that didn't require any, you know, flame retardant ability, that didn't require the ability to go into an IDLH atmosphere or a live fire or live burn. And it just made the user hot, sweaty, and mimicked frontline bunker gear. So at that point in time, we got a demo set. I tried it on. I was like, hey, this will work. So we kind of hit the ground running, found another manufacturer, made a few suits, and went from there. And then as far as the research goes, I was in my master's degree at the time. So I was reading studies constantly. And when this idea came to me, I was like, okay, I need to verify that this makes sense. So let me start digging through all the literature I can and verifying that this concept, that it holds weight, it holds water, that I'm not just thinking it's a good idea and there's a giant hole in my theory. So I read as much research as I could. I looked at exposures for firefighters. Obviously, we see the cancer rates are high. And then on top of that, okay, why are these cancer rates high? What are some of the things we're coming into contact with? PAHs, or polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. That is one of the oldest known human carcinogen in occupational cancer. So that was actually found in English chimney sweeps that were young boys back in the late 1800s. So that was the first documented occurrence of this happening. And they were having higher rates of testicular cancers at young ages. So this was kind of the first documentation of that. That is a compound or a particulate that we come in contact with all the time. It's probably the number one particulate that firefighters encounter, because it is a incomplete combustion of an organic substance. So that happens to be in about everything that burns. And that is something that, you know, we've known for a long time. And that's where respirators kind of came into play, where we're using self-contained breathing apparatus. The SCBAs have been in the fire service for multiple generations now, but we still see an increase in cancer rates. Like, they're not going down as quickly as they should, if that was the solution and the only problem that we were encountering. Okay, so where are the rest of these exposures coming from? Dermal absorption seems to be the primary answer that we're missing, and that's kind of been elucidated in the past 10 years of the research. So you're seeing things like pHs that even a low dose of that is going to have the absorption of 20 to 50% of those, of a very small amount over about 6 hours. So that's where they kind of come up with the shower within the hour. When you're doing things like that, you're getting the chemicals off your skin quicker and sooner than later, hopefully prior to long-term absorption. You have heavy metals that you're coming into contact with, especially now with electrical vehicle fires. I think that that's something that's on the horizon that is a potential hazard. You have flame retardants. We've seen multiple studies that flame retardants are higher on firefighters, both before and after fires, than typical population. And that's studied on American citizens and French and Italian, I want to say. So we see higher levels of pHs and flame retardants on them, exposures to heavy metals. And then we also have the PFAS, which is something that is what I like to call like a gateway conversation to most guys. So most people weren't really talking about all these other chemicals at all. PFAS was something that obviously had national publicity and national media exposure, and guys were curious to what it was. Why was it in firefighter gear? Why was it hurting us? And what exactly do we do about it? So with all that being said, you've got, 4 or 5 chemicals that and microplastics, sorry, I forgot that one, that we have a lot of research on for, respiratory, dermal absorption, all the above. And then when you go into any house fire, you're seeing, I think, north of 100 different potential carcinogens. I think that's a quote from the NFPA, might be the IAFF. But you have so many exposures that sometimes it's not even worth counting what exactly they are. We just know that going into smoke and particulates is not helpful. It's not good for you. So trying to reduce that absolute exposure load over time. And then we also see in the research that the guys that are firefighters that are just going to work, they're not even catching a fire, they're not working a fire. When they come off shift, they still have higher levels of PAHs and flame retardants on them than when they were prior to coming into shift. So overall, you know that we're having some level of exposure just going to the fire station, throwing your gear on, being around touching the apparatus, being around this environment that has particulates and exposures that have been, cross contaminated across the department or across the station. So it's a big picture type thing, but I think that's a good starting point to throw us off the ledge of cancer risk reduction in the fire service.
It's funny you're talking about the chimney sweep, because just going back to the work week for a second, when I did the presentation at the Florida Professional Firefighters Association conference, I use that example. The way we've always done it. Well, we used to have children working in factories and 6-year-olds going up chimneys. And when they started dropping like flies, someone finally said, well, wait a second, maybe we shouldn't be doing this. And I think it's the same with what we're talking about with the shifts and all the other things is, with the gear. I mean, everything that we're talking about is how many firefighters do we have to lose before we say, all right, the way that we're doing it isn't working. So it's interesting that you use that analogy.
Yeah. Yeah. And the gear kind of came to the forefront in my mind because I'm like, okay, this is one variable that we have that is completely within our control. We do not need to be wearing our frontline gear when we're just doing drill yard stuff, which is 90% of guys training, right? You just go do a 2-minute drill, force a door, do a search, flow some water, whatever it is, throwing ladders. A lot of the training that we do every day doesn't require thermal protection. So why are we exposing ourselves unnecessarily to a dermal exposure to a set of gear and fabric that is going to be exposed for the rest of its life? Now, does that mean that we, don't need to be doing gross decon or you don't need to be washing your gear? No, all of these things are variables that we need to be doing in the fire service. And that's where kind of what you talked about before, where I had mentioned there's multiple different things that we look at and try and, start crossing each one of those off the list, right? There's some things that are going to be bigger bang for your buck. So 24/72s, right? We're limiting exposures. You're increasing guys' amount of sleep. And then you also have things like going into fires with your bunker gear. If you're wearing particulate blocking bunker gear, research has shown that the particulate blocking bunker gear is going to block about 10-ish% more particulates than traditional bunker gear. So the particulate blocking gear is kind of improving efficiency in that interface area where the pants are tight around the boots. There's kind of like an elastic band there. So you're not having like an open pathway for vapors to come up in between the gear and the user. And then same thing with the waistband around the coat so that they're not getting exposure around the torso. And when they were doing that research, you can see pictures of the guys and they would have large amounts of particulates around their neck, which is where that interface is with the hood and the jacket, around their bottom of their waist, where the coat stops and the pants start, and then around the bottom of their ankles and calves and areas like that. So you've got some of these heavy hitter things that you can do, like improving your gear, making sure you're wearing your respirator at all times. Even if you're pumping a truck, if you're first due on a fire scene and you're standing in front of the house, there's a study done in Tucson from 2015 to 2019. They're seeing a 40% reduction in urinary PAHs. So after the body has metabolized the pH that it's inhaled, they are seeing a reduction of 40% of those if the engineers were putting on their SCBA packs at the scene of the fire. So you have all of these different variables that we can kind of look at and use. And in my mind, with the Carna gear, that was just another variable and another tool. I'm like, I want to help the fire service. I want to help reduce these numbers of cancer deaths and bring this number back into a just bring it down, right? Try and improve our health and longevity in the fire service, and allow guys to enjoy their retirement. Our tool with Carna Bunker Gear is just one tool. It is not a panacea. It is not the fix of cancer in the fire service. And I think that allowing guys to hear some of the other opportunities to try and reduce cancer that we're talking about and we're explaining, I think that also gives them a little bit more respect, where we're not just selling a product, like we are trying to sell a better fire service. And that is ultimately our goal. We do have a product that meets one of the needs, the many needs that we have in order to do so.
When you talked about saunas, it takes me back to interviewing Stefan and David from Healthy Firefighters, the Swedish guys that came up with the Skellefteå model in the first place. And there was this big kind of, up in arms about the clean cab, and you hear this bullshit phrases like clean cab, stop grabs, and I'm like, oh, for fuck's sake! So you leap off a fire engine with your cape and you just fly straight into the front door. But I get it, like, you obviously can't make a fire engine completely sterile either. So there's that middle ground. But, sitting, breathing your gear that's off-gassing makes no sense. And then being a Tillerman in California, we didn't have the pack in the doghouse. It was down in the compartment beneath us. So you realize just how quickly you can throw on a pack. So even just from a crash point of view, if you don't have that pack digging you into the back and, the ability for it to be a projectile, it just makes it safer to step off the rig and then get a pack. So there's a lot of kind of middle ground that you can glean a lot of these things without pretending that it's going to be zero exposure now. And so I really like that model. I like the second set of gear. I like the, completely cleaning the pack, and because that kind of hosey, soapy, brushy thing that we do, we know damn well that's not actually deconning the pack.
No.
A machine has to do that. So I really like that. But yeah, so it's more about, look, there's all these things set up against us. What are the things that we can do to reduce the exposures? And then conversely, like we talked about, and with the human being, what can we do to boost the immunity, to boost the ability to deal with these insults? I had my PFAS blood work done a few months ago, and it was off the charts. So I'm hoping that the probiotic that they're working on now, that that will actually work, cambiotics, that will work, because so many of us are just dripping in PFAS, and that's just, like you said, one of them. So it makes perfect sense to me, and that's why we talked, why not? Like, there's a whole argument, should you or shouldn't you work out with your gear on? Well, if depending on what you're doing, you can do it in gym shorts and a t-shirt, but there's times where you have to be in the pain cave in something that simulates your gear. So why not do something that doesn't expose you even more, so that you can limit those to when you absolutely have to put your gear on and go to an IDLH environment?
Yeah, there's like three things I wanted to touch on after you said that. That was a great segue. The probiotics is super cool. I thought of that. And it's funny because my bullshit detector went off when I heard that at first. I was like, I don't know if this is legit. And one of my good friends at work, he had sent me your podcast where you'd mentioned it. And I looked into it and I'm like, wow, this is legit. And I started thinking about it. I'm like, well, I know that the oatmeal, the fiber in oatmeal and fiber in general helps to kind of attract and bind some of these particulates and exposures, PFAS included. And that's one way of passing some of these particles, and microplastics as well. So I was like, okay, yeah, this is legit. And this is something I look forward to seeing in the future, the release of that, and seeing if it can, grab a hold in the fire service. That's something that's super cool. I kind of geeked out about that. There was something else you'd said going into the pain cave and stuff with guys trying to, figure out what kind of workout they're doing that day and all of the above. Training and building that base level of fitness is something that you don't have to be in gear every single day. And that's another thing that we discuss and talk about with guys is, okay, if I'm wearing my bunker gear, I am going to, and same thing with wearing your SCBA. When you put all these things on, it's basically restricting, you're governing yourself. So if you have a carburetor, you're not allowing the carb to open all the way, right? Your VO2 max is reduced when you throw that SCBA on. When you throw all that gear on, your capacity to do work is reduced. So as soon as you start overheating, as soon as your heart rate gets super high, you're not able to perform at as high of a level. So we have to build the foundation of fitness prior to getting in gear. You have to be able to, do your long duration cardio. You have to be able to do the high intensity cardio. You have to do all these things. And doing it out of gear gives you volume, right? It gives you enough work and volume to build this foundation. And then if it's somebody that doesn't really have good heat adaptations yet, like we're in Florida, it's hot, it's humid, it's miserable most of the year,
Yeah.
especially if you're in gear on a fire scene in the middle of summer. Holy shit. That is some of the most brutal stuff you can do. So having guys just exercising in general, it's the first step of heat exposure. You're having heat shock proteins, you're elevating core body temperature. That would be level 1 of heat exposure for guys, right? So like just exercise, do something. And then, okay, maybe let's exercise outside, do it out in the bay, go for a run outside in the heat and the humidity, and then throw the gear on. So you have these levels, right? It's like a performance triangle in my mind. You have the foundation, and then you have another step above that, and then you have the peak, which would be throwing your gear on and doing a full in gear on air type workout. And that's where obviously our gear comes into play and would allow guys to do so with no risk. And they're able to push the performance, increase their ability to tolerate uncompensable heat stress. And the uncompensable heat stress is slightly different than normal heat stress because, as we all know, when you're wearing bunker gear, there eventually gets a point where your body temperature, your core body temperature, it's not controllable anymore. It's kind of a runaway thermal heat train. So in the literature, that's what they call uncompensable heat stress. And it's really hard to mimic that. I mean, you could do it, obviously, because people have heat strokes. So it's not impossible to do out, training it outside and stuff, but it is much more controllable when you throw the gear on. And then you're in that exact same sport specific, job specific modality where you're wearing the gear that's restrictive, it's hot, it's heavy, you're moving around, you're doing all the normal fireground tasks. So to me, that's really where the gear shines in performance aspect, is giving guys uncompensable heat stress adaptations and doing so in a specific manner that's going to really transfer to the fire service. It's not, it's not just jumping into a sauna and riding a stationary bike.
That was one of the things I struggle with. And if I think back, it got worse, if I'm not mistaken, as I got older. But I would say I never had a single task in fire gear that it was the exertion that made me want to tap out. It was always the heat. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you've seen any literature as far as aging, but I felt that my thermoregulation got worse as I got older as well.
I'd have to look at that. I know that I'm with you. The heat is what kills me. It's what whips my ass. I know that there's also, if you're overweight body fat wise, body fat is not going to, it's too much insulation. So it's not going to allow guys to be as thermally adapted. Guys that have high levels of aerobic fitness, they seem to adapt to heat stress more readily, and they also maintain that heat stress longer. And then also things like thyroid. So I'm personally on thyroid medication, and your thyroid can dictate a lot of that as well. So you're not going to be able to tolerate as much heat stress if you're hypothyroid and things of that nature. So there's definitely a lot of variables that can come into that. And then as well as when the body temperature gets up higher and higher, you're essentially making everything more anaerobic. So you're shifting stuff from an aerobic environment more into that anaerobic environment. And that's unfortunately what the heat does. So and eventually it doesn't matter if you're in the gear long enough, your body temperature is going to go up, especially if you're doing any amount of exercise. The body is releasing heat when the muscle contracts and it's doing work, you're releasing that energy in the form of heat. So you're building heat up from your core body temperature itself. You're not allowing it to evaporate because of the high, the lack of thermal heat loss in the bunker gear. So you have all these compounds that are kind of making the perfect formula for heat exhaustion and things of that nature. You're just making it super hard. If you go outside and dig a ditch with a t-shirt and a pair of shorts, it's not the same thing as digging a ditch in full gear. It's not that digging the ditch got any harder. It's just that you're reducing your ability to perform.
I used to do a lot of workouts like Murph and Chad 1000 in full gear, and then as I progressed a little bit, like Chad was usually bunker pants. And I just did Chad the other day, a few weeks ago, and I always use a 60-pound vest. And it was amazing, just exactly what you're talking about. Not saying, wow, I'm some amazing athlete, but it was just an observation of the ability to offload heat. I did Murph in just, t-shirt and shorts this time, and then the same with Chad. And it's literally night and day, but it shows the value. And now I'm not working, as a firefighter anymore, so I don't need to be able to suffer in that gear, but it shows you the value of training and gear, because I couldn't agree more. There are many, many workouts that you just simply don't have to be wearing gear for. And I would argue, you get better mobility and better form
Yeah.
when you're not restricted and you got, the pack all the way in the back. I'm a big fan of weight vests if you are going to do encumbered workouts. But you have to spend time in the gear as well, suffering, getting hot, because it is a mental game as well. And this is what kills me about the lack of standards. If the last time that you were really in the pain cave was in the academy, and now
Yeah.
here we
Too long.
are 15 years later, and your life or someone else's life depends on you finding a dark place that you haven't been in 15 years, you are not going to get there. But if the last time that you did a red line workout, you went out in the Florida sun and 98 degrees and you pushed sleds and pulled sandbags and flipped tires and hit sledge strikes, and it was awful, but you got through it. Now, the last time that you were in that dark place was Tuesday.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And you're familiar with it. You're not having that same high anxiety response that's going to, kind of put you in the black, right? When your tunnel vision comes on, you're not thinking properly. And that's another thing with heat stress is the mental reduction and the cognitive performance reduction. So even just 1% of dehydration, we see a reduction in cognitive performance, and 2% dehydration. If you lose 2% of your body weight, we're starting to see physical decrements in performance. And that's something, kind of talking about the jumping gears with sports performance. When I powerlifted for a long time, we would do major weight cuts. I was not good at it when I was wrestling, but competing in powerlifting, we'd have 24-hour weigh-ins. I would drop 10% of my body weight in fluid, which is not healthy for you by any stretch of the imagination, but it allowed me to complete at a lower weight class, be more competitive, etc. And oh my God, I could not have lifted a wet rag if I went to compete at that body weight without refilling and rehydrating. And that's something that I try and, be on top of guys, especially in Florida with the environment we have. When guys are going out and training or they're going out and working out in the bay, doing things like that, getting back inside and rehydrating as soon as possible, making sure they're getting electrolytes and a little bit of carbohydrates. Guys, please don't fear carbohydrates. All of these electrolyte packs, you want to have 10-ish grams of carbs. That actually helps facilitate the sodium getting back into the cell quicker. So I think you're going to have like a 20-30% improvement for sodium absorption and getting the cell rehydrated. So that's something to keep in mind when guys are doing, low carb and no carb electrolyte packs and things of that nature.
You mentioned weight cuts. I never understood why you don't just simply compete on the day that you weigh in and just eliminate that. And I don't know where that's come from. And I get, the whole loophole thing. I mean, that's where the god awful CrossFit pull-up came up, for the butterfly pull-up, for example. But, in MMA and everything, you see these renal problems and rhabdo, and I just don't get it right. You're going to fight that evening, right? Weigh in at lunchtime. There we go.
Yep.
I think you'd eliminate so many issues.
I agree. I really don't know where it came from, but it's at that point, it's like one of the competitive things where like, now it's there and you're either going to use it or somebody's going to use it against you. So doing it smart and making sure you're not causing more harm than good. I know that there were some wild dudes back in the powerlifting was such a wild sport. I loved coming into it. It was like the Wild West. And back when I got in like 2010, there was stories of, I think, a Russian guy who would do the dehydration, and then on top of that he would also pull some of his blood to then lose weight, and then he would have the blood infused back into him after he'd weigh in. I'm like, that is absolutely insane, but not healthy. Don't take that advice, but just fun stories.
While I'm thinking of health issues when it comes to working on the fireground, one area that you hear it discussed, but I don't think you hear it discussed enough, is energy drinks. What has been your exposure to that, energy drinks, and then people falling out, rhabdo, etc.?
Dude, I'm also like a sociopath, I think, because I don't drink caffeine. I just operate on piss and vinegar, I think, and a little bit of anger. So I basically got through probation. I was like, I want to see if I can do this without drinking coffee, because I saw just the addiction to coffee as a probie, just having to pour coffee for everybody all the time, and make sure the pot's full. I think that it might play a variable. It does play a variable when guys are overdosing it, right? Just like anything, the doses and the poison. If guys were sticking to normal amounts of caffeine, which I think the recommendation is like 3 to 400 milligrams a day, maybe 500 milligrams a day, I don't think we would see much of an issue. But when guys are abusing the caffeine on top of not sleeping well, you are going to see negative repercussions from guys abusing caffeine, using 3, 4, 5 energy drinks a day just to sustain themselves because they're combating sleep deprivation, because they're not getting quality sleep off shift. They're using that as a crutch, and that's always been my perspective on it. Is I didn't want to use coffee as a crutch, and I also think it might have to do with some of the blood pressure values and things of that nature, where guys are having higher heart rates, higher blood pressures because they're constantly stimmed out of their mind. So if guys would bring the range back down, come back into a normal range of caffeine intake, I think 300-400 milligrams is fine. Don't quote me on that. I think that's pretty close. But Megan Lutz, she's a RD that works at Fairfax. She's awesome. I've heard her lecture quite often, and she does a very good job of going into some of those specific dosing criterias.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is yet another conversation where if we simply weren't chronically sleep deprived, we wouldn't be leaning into coffee and energy drinks as much. So
yeah,
just another area where, if you can get the rest and recovery, people are more likely just to be like, oh, no, I'm good. Herbal tea or a glass of water or whatever. Yeah. But I was that guy too. I drank a lot of coffee on shift, so I can totally relate.
Yeah, the guys in their coffee, that's something you don't mess with for sure.
Well, so we talked about kind of the exercise side. What can you do as far as the training side, the actual operational training, and then what are the restrictions, the limits, what you wouldn't be able to do in this gear?
Oh, for Carna. So it's made and created to serve as a non-ideal H atmosphere training. So it is not rated for live fire. It's not rated for being into an atmosphere that can potentially burn. So part of the idea with that is using the gear in drill yard type scenarios. So academies, going out, throwing ladders, pulling hoses, all of the normal daily training that you're doing, which does not require going into a high thermal temperature atmosphere. And that's kind of where we thought it would shine and will shine, is in a couple different ways, right? You're allowing guys to still get the training in, which is allowing them to be better firefighters. You're reducing their exposure rates by not having gear, not wearing gear that's exposed at some level or another, some more than others. And then this was actually side topic. Some of the research, it was a study that came out earlier this year. They looked at 3 different kinds of bunker gear. One was 2011, 2014, and 2019, I want to say. All of them were treated with PFAS from the factory. One of them was never worn. One of them was in service for about 8 years. The one that was in service for 8 years actually had higher levels of PFAS, and they were volatile PFAS that were from the authors noted that it was most likely from the environmental exposures. So you're seeing gear that not only is it treated with PFAS, and obviously we're moving away from that in frontline gear or some capacity, and you're seeing that it's still going to be on the gear once you go into the fire. So I want guys to understand that as well, that it's not just contaminated from the factories because of PFAS's ability to repel oil and being very good at that, and also being very breathable. So you're going to lose breathability when you have non-PFAS gear. But you're going to get those exposures when you start going into fires as well, as far as house fires, structure fires, things of that nature. So we're trying to reduce some of those unnecessary absorptions dermally. And then third, you're going to be seeing, we have already seen some of this non-PFAS gear. I've talked to independent service providers that do repairs on bunker gear, that do turnout rental companies, things of that nature. They're already seeing some of this non-PFAS gear not perform as long. Their durability is compromised, especially if the gear is hung and is exposed to UV light. PFAS was a major protector for the bunker gear compared to for UV radiation. Kevlar is very, very susceptible to UV damage. So that is something that we think would fill a hole as well, is using the bunker gear to try and elongate the life and the performance life of the frontline gear. Frontline gear is very expensive. It's expensive because it's a complicated product and textile that's made that protects us in crazy environments. So you're not going to be able to just reduce the cost on that, especially transferring to non-PFAS gear seems to be more expensive. So if we can figure out a way to make the life of that gear extend a little bit more, potentially using the Carna gear is going to help pay for itself while also reducing guys' exposure rates. So that's not my priority, is extending the frontline life of gear. It is obviously something that is a great dollar sign. We like to talk to administration and chiefs and budgets about that because it is something that could potentially help pay for itself. Obviously, my first priority is protecting the guys, but it is a great tool, and it also can help extend the performance of the gear once it's in a fire, because the less they're wearing their gear, their frontline gear, the less they're washing it, the less they're beating on it, the better that set of frontline gear is going to perform in a fire because it's closer to factory specs. So we want to basically allow guys to have alternative training gear to use in that nature. We aren't allowing it to be used in ideal H atmospheres, and we make it blue primarily just so that guys are kind of color coordinated and they know that if they see that odd color, that it's not rated for frontline gear. And then ideally it's also not made for vehicle extrication stuff because there is no oil repellency on it. There's no protective layer for if fluids were to penetrate, whether that be, battery acids or some kind of hydraulic fluid of that nature. So just making sure the guys are aware that safety still comes first with this, and it's a tool that has limitations, just like frontline bunker gear. But I think that it has a spot and a role in the fire service.
I mean, it makes so much sense to me from an exposure point of view. But if I'm thinking in my mind of a scenario, say you were lucky enough to have the fire sled stuff at your station too, you're out in the back apron, you're moving that sled around, you're wearing your blue gear, you got a weight vest on, and a call comes in. Well, you can just doff everything and then run over to your engine, and now everything's exactly where you left it. The hose is on the bed, your gear is ready to be deployed if needed, or if you're running an EMS, you're not having to put everything back. So, it's that exposure and that separation, but even from an ability to respond quickly. I mean, I've had it where, we're wearing all our gear and we've got ladders out and, you're scrambling, trying to get everything back before you can even, leave the bay. So there is that as well.
Yes. That's one of the funny highlights that some of my friends that have the gear also tell me all the time is they're like, dude, I would buy this just so I don't have to put my sweaty ass gear on to run a call.
Exactly.
He's like, if we're training. So I think that's one of the funnier feedbacks I've gotten is that one right there. They're like, it's worth it just for that.
So who is using it at the moment?
It's actually really cool. We've sold to a lot of individual firefighters, which I didn't expect. I wasn't, because it's not cheap. The original set or an individual set at under 50 units is $1,500, which, everybody spends money on different things. And we see some guys with, very expensive vehicles or, full sleeves and tattoos that are very expensive. So you can have money that you would, spend somewhere else that you could definitely spend on something that helps your job and health. But not telling people how to budget for themselves. But at that point, like I get it. It's not a cheap expense. It's not a $50, thing that you're purchasing, but it is something that can ideally last a long time, and guys can take it with them for an extended period of time and train in it and be very useful for them. So, we're hopefully we've been selling to a lot of individuals. We've sold to some fire departments across the country. I think we just finished manufacturing 130 the other week, and then we've just got those distributed to 3 or 4 or 5 different departments, and we're going to do another 50, 60 here shortly, as soon as we can turn around and get some more materials. So we're getting out there, and we did one small school academy, and then we've had an academy in St. Augustine run the demo gear, or a gear for a demo for a full fire academy class. It is definitely harder for the fire academy. I mean, fire academies are hard on everything, right? Because they're in the gear constantly. They're beating it up. They're doing all kinds of stuff that normal fire department training isn't going to do. So I am looking at different options to try and improve things. So we've done things like apply some durable water repellents that are non-PFAS, that can hopefully, help the gear stay not as wet, because it is cotton. It's a duck cotton on the exterior, so it will retain moisture longer. So having to use fans or drying racks or having things of that nature usually help it dry quicker. So the gear won't dry as fast as some of our frontline gear. So that is something that folks have to get used to. Which, so when you're in the academy, your gear's soaked all the time anyways, but that was some feedback that we had. And then trying to just, make small adjustments here and there and tweaks. So improvements in knee pads, maybe putting some Kevlar on the pockets. And it's all really a cost of benefit ratio, because frontline gear is very expensive for a reason, right? Like, it performs very highly. It's almost bulletproof for a certain amount of years. And you get a really great performing product, but we can't start making something that's so amazing that it's frontline bunker gear. And you're trying to fit into a market where it makes sense cost and affordability wise for departments to be able to purchase still. So if I start making something that is, 100% made of Kevlar, we're just not going to be able to sustain that lower price model for guys and departments to be able to afford. And at this point, our starting bulk price is 50 units at $1,000, which I think is extremely reasonable, especially departments when they see that in their budgets. They're usually very excited at that benchmark compared to what they would be paying to purchase 50 sets of normal gear. So if that can allow them to, offset the cost of rebuying, frontline gear by a few years, then I think it's worthwhile.
I agree 100%. Well, I want to throw some closing questions at you before I let you go. The first one I love to ask: is there a book or other books that you love to recommend? It can be related to our discussion today or completely unrelated.
Yeah, so this is going to hit real home for you. Jocko Willink's book, obviously. Extreme Ownership is definitely one of my favorite books. I recommend everybody to read that. I think it's such a groundbreaking book that he's done such a great job, and he just sees things very, very well. He writes very well. All of their stories are applicable. Awesome book. And then one of the classics that I know Jocko probably gleaned information from as well was How to Win Friends and Influence People. That's an excellent, long-standing book. So, and then anything really written by Jordan Peterson, I love him as well. So any of those are, I think, very worthwhile books that can educate guys in a variety of different ways, but really how to be a good person, a good leader, which I think is super valuable for the fire service.
Absolutely. Yeah, I just spent yesterday with some of the Echelon front team. I didn't see Jocko, but I saw Jason Gardner and a few of the other guys. And yeah, it's, they had 1,000 people in the conference.
Yes.
So yeah,
I guess I didn't realize I didn't realize that was this weekend. I would have probably tried to get over there, but that is, they put on a great event. I've been to a few musters. I actually did a little bit of side gigs for them back in the day when we would do the basically training for the companies. They would hire them out as contractors. They would come in and do the lecture series, and then I would come with some other guys, oftentimes like retired SEALs or ex-military dudes, and we would play laser tag with the companies. And that would be something where there's 5 or 6 of us against 40 of them, and by the first time we just destroy them, and then they start implementing some of the teamwork stuff, and by the end of the day, the end of the week, they're starting to work together and beat us out there on the battleground. But that was a lot of fun. I did that a few years ago.
Yeah, no, it was amazing. When I watched it the first time, which is 2021, I was just joking with Jason. They come out to this rock music, and I just kept seeing Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. Hello, San Dimas. I saw it again this time, and I was chuckling to myself. But yeah, Rob Jones is joined them now, who's a guy I've had on the show, double amputee Marine engineer. Amazing talk. So all the people that they have, every single one has got a different lens. So it's definitely worth it.
Yeah, they're an awesome group. So yeah, again, anything that those dudes put out at Echelon Front or Jocko, yeah, definitely check out. And I know that's not news to most people, but full support.
Absolutely. Well, what about documentaries, films, television?
Just because obviously with the some of the conversations we've been having and the PFAS exposures, things of that nature, the Dark Waters Dark Waters movie. I know that you've spoken to the man himself, and that is such a good movie, and it explains some of the background and the back end of the creation of PFAS and DuPont and all the kind of disgusting business practices and ethical things that occurred at that time throughout the creation of Teflon and all the above. So that's a really good movie to watch. That's on topic, on brand. Other documentaries and movies and stuff. I don't know. I love shows. I love documentaries. I love movies. So, God, I wish I had anything else off the top of my head. We started watching The Beast in Me. That's on Netflix right now. That's a cool one. Claire Danes is a really good actress, so I'm interested in that. That's definitely got some psychological aspects to it that are interesting. So that's been a good new watch for me.
Brilliant. Well, the next question, is there a person that you recommend to come on this podcast as a guest to speak to the first responders, military, and associated professions of the world?
Oof. I'm sure I could come up with a few. I don't know if you have interviewed him, but I am a big fan of Dr. Ormond from NC State. I've read a ton of his research. He's got some really cool stuff that he's done. And he is a fabric textile expert, and he's done some preliminary research on PFAS through dermal absorption. And then Dr. Heather Stapleton is awesome out of Duke University. She's done a bunch of studies as well on dermal absorption and flame retardants. And what is her name? She's a professor from Appalachian State, and she's done a lot of dermal absorption studies as well. And she's done a unique, basically skin dialysis almost, so that you can see the absorption of chemical exposures almost in real time. So that they've been doing that on different fireground scenes, and they tested it in other subjects prior to going out into the field and having firefighters do it. So they would go into buildings, do a live burn, and they would come out and they would get the samples and see how much absorption of chemicals were caught. She was actually seeing very high levels of absorption, much higher than what she expected. So that was a surprise to her. So yeah, any three of those I think would be excellent speakers for you to interview.
I think that's what really blows me away when you listen to the scientists, because we have this presumption that, well, if you're wearing your gear, all the bad stuff can't get to me. But they do these tests and you realize how much made it, not even as you said about, where the seal points are, the neck and the ankles and the wrists, but like even through the chest and the groin and everywhere else, that it went right through the fabric and still absorbed to us.
Yeah, that's something that I think guys don't realize, is that there's particles that are penetrating through the fibers of the bunker gear and through their bodies, and they're in their bloodstream prior to exiting the structure fire. Not all of them, but there are some that are very lightweight particles that are doing that. So for guys to understand that, that's also where some of the deeper washing things come in, where you're cleaning the deep fibers of the gear. And even one of the cooler small studies I saw was walking out of a fire, and prior to going to gross decon, just opening up your jacket, opening up your pants, allowing those vapors to off gas for a few minutes. And then while you're going over to gross decon, then you zip back up and get scrubbed down. So there's these cool little things that I think are neat, and these scientists and professors that are doing the studies can, give us very informative feedback for how to actually apply some of this stuff in the real world, and not, butcher their studies on 2448s and 4896s.
Last question before we make sure everyone knows where to find you and Carna. What do you do to decompress?
Ooh, I don't know if I do decompress enough. Mental health, baby. No. I love lifting weights. I love going to the gym and training. That is such an outlet for me. So that's probably my primary thing. And even doing cardio at the station, I know that when I get done training and lifting, you have the endorphins, you have all the different chemical reactions going on. I feel better. And sometimes just when you push yourself so hard, and not every session's like this, right? But when you push yourself so hard and then you go and sit in your car, you go and walk home, and everything's just like static quiet, and you don't have anything going on in your head. You're not thinking about other crazy thoughts. There's nothing in a to-do list, just because you're so exhausted from putting that work in, and you feel good and you're walking out. That's probably my favorite feeling. So I'll go with exercise as my outlet, my healthy addiction.
There we go. Well, for people listening there, let's start with Carna. Where can they find Carna, learn more, or even purchase?
Yeah, so we have a website, carnabunkergear.com. Carna is Carna. It is actually the Roman goddess of health and vitality, specifically the inner organs. So that's where we got that name, and it's very fitting, in my opinion. We also have a social media account. We're on Instagram, probably most active, I would say. I try and post educational things, and try and give guys information and things that are helpful. So we try and give back to the community and try and give guys things that are going to help improve their health and safety, whether that's fitness or cancer risk reduction stuff. And we have some articles that I've written that are on the website as well. And our email is carnabunkergear@gmail.com. Feel free to reach out to us on any of those outlets. We have like a contact information on the website where you can kind of fill in a request box for us to reach out to you. So that's available there. You can email us or you can message us on Instagram or Facebook.
Beautiful. Are there any other areas for you specifically online or social media?
Yeah, I have a LinkedIn that I've been trying to use, and I have my personal Instagram as well. And then anybody that emails us, if I respond back, I usually send my personal cell as well. So if you have any questions, concerns, whatever, shoot me a text, call me. I'm more than happy to talk to anybody about things, especially anything to do with cancer risk reduction in the fire service. If I can answer the question, I will do so. If I don't have an answer to the question, I will try and find the answer, or I will find a resource for you to send you.
Brilliant. Well, I want to thank you so much. It's been such an interesting conversation, not only obviously with the cancer element, but the strength and conditioning side too, with you having a background as an athlete and the academic side as well. So I want to thank you so much for being so generous with your time and coming on the Behind the Shield podcast today.
James, thank you for having me, brother. And I think you're one of the best podcasters in the building, not just for the awesome podcast that you do, but for the British accent. I think you are top notch with that. And that's what sets this over the edge.